Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. Today's case will leave you disturbed and unsettled. It's a story of trust betrayed, love turned into obsession, and a man who unleashed a wave of violence on the very family that welcomed him with open arms. This is the story of Shelby Neely, a man who calmly and methodically ended the lives of 4 people, including his wife, and justified it all under the guise of protecting his children. In today's episode, we'll explore his calculated murders, his unsettling psychological profile, and the chilling details of how he avoided capture for over a year. So settle in as we unravel the dark and tragic tale of the Ivanic family and their killer son-in-law. On January 1st, 2019, the West Palm Beach Police Department received a call from a concerned man. He hadn't heard from his father, 71-year-old Richard Ivanic, or his stepmother, 59-year-old Laura Ivanic, since before Christmas. "I've been trying to reach them for over a week," he said. "They're not answering their phones. I'm worried something might have happened." Officers arrived at the Ivanic residence, expecting a routine welfare check. But the moment they stepped inside, they were hit with the unmistakable stench of death. The scene was gruesome. Richard, Laura, and their son, 25-year-old Nick Ivanic, lay in various stages of decomposition. Bloodstains had seeped into the walls and carpet, and chemical agents had been used in a futile attempt to clean up the evidence. Outside the home, a shallow trench had been dug. Neighbors reported seeing a man in his 20s digging late at night, accompanied by a small child. This man was quickly identified as Shelby Neely, the Ivanic's son-in-law. But as police pieced together the evidence, a more horrifying discovery awaited. The disappearance of Jamie Neely was shrouded in mystery for over a year, and no one in her family suspected foul play. Shelby Neely, her husband, was quick to provide a plausible explanation. Jamie had left to find herself and escape the pressures of family life. According to Shelby, she had been struggling with personal demons, and the sudden departure was not entirely unexpected. But behind the scenes, Shelby worked tirelessly to maintain the illusion of Jamie's existence. He sent text messages to her parents, Richard and Laura Ivanic, pretending to be her. Sometimes he adopted a tone of frustration, claiming she needed space and didn't want to speak to anyone. At other times, he sent photos of their 2 children, Oliver and their infant daughter, to reassure the family that everything was fine. The Ivanics, while confused by Jamie's behavior, didn't push too hard for answers. They chalked it up to stress or marital troubles and trusted Shelby's account. After all, he seemed to be managing well, taking care of the children on his own and maintaining contact with the family. But cracks in Shelby's facade began to show. Friends and neighbors noticed he avoided talking about Jamie in person. When asked about her whereabouts, his answers were vague and inconsistent. He claimed she was working long hours or staying with friends in another state. Even more bizarre was the fact that Jamie's voice was never heard during this time. Every communication was through text messages or emails, and the Ivanics never insisted on a phone call. In hindsight, this would prove to be one of the most chilling aspects of the case. Shelby had been impersonating Jamie all along. One particularly disturbing detail emerged during Shelby's later confession. He revealed that he knew Jamie's habits, personality, and even her texting style so well that he could convincingly mimic her. He described how he would intentionally create arguments over text to make the messages seem authentic, knowing that Jamie had often been at odds with her parents. "I knew exactly how she'd respond to things," Shelby told detectives. "If I made it look like she was angry, they wouldn't push too hard to reach her." For over a year, Shelby's deception went unnoticed. Jamie's family grew accustomed to her absence, and Shelby used this time to build a new life for himself. He moved from Florida to Texas, where he stayed with relatives and found work in the oil fields. But as time went on, Shelby began to fear that his lies would unravel. The Ivanics were growing increasingly concerned about Jamie's long silence and started pressing Shelby for answers. Their persistence, combined with Shelby's mounting paranoia, led to a horrifying conclusion. The Ivanics had to be eliminated. This chapter of the story is perhaps the most haunting. Shelby's ability to manipulate Jamie's family for an entire year shows a calculated cruelty that is difficult to comprehend. It wasn't just a crime of passion, it was a prolonged and deliberate deception that allowed Shelby to avoid suspicion while plotting his next move. What makes this even more unsettling is the psychological toll it must have taken on him to maintain the illusion. For over a year, Shelby lived a double life, pretending to be a loving father while knowing that Jamie's body lay buried in the backyard of their former home. But even with this level of manipulation, one question remains. Why didn't anyone push harder to find Jamie? Was it trust in Shelby, fear of confrontation, or simply the assumption that Jamie had chosen to disappear? The answers to these questions may never be fully known, but they highlight a tragic reality. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we know the least. When police tracked Shelby down in Lakewood, Ohio, he was driving Laura Ivanic's car and using the family's credit cards at pawn shops. He seemed unconcerned as officers closed in, almost as if he expected to be caught. During his interrogation, Shelby was surprisingly cooperative. "Let's just get this over with," he said, sipping coffee. Detectives were stunned by his composure. He spoke about the murders as though he were describing an ordinary day, detailing his crimes with chilling precision. "I killed them all," he said simply. To understand Shelby's actions, detectives delved into his past. Born and raised in Ohio, Shelby had a relatively stable childhood, but his life took a dark turn after the death of his father when he was 17. By 18, Shelby had dropped out of school, gotten a girlfriend pregnant, and found himself in an abusive relationship. After that marriage fell apart, he met Jamie, a woman he described as his savior. But their relationship quickly turned toxic. According to Shelby, Jamie was physically and emotionally abusive. He claimed she would fly into uncontrollable rages, even attacking him with knives. "I loved her," Shelby said during his interrogation, "but when she came at my daughter with a knife, I knew I had to stop her." In January 2018, Shelby claimed Jamie attacked him during a violent argument. He choked her in what he described as self-defense. "When the blood started coming out of her nose, I stopped," he said. But it was too late. Shelby buried Jamie in the backyard of their Florida home and began an elaborate cover-up. He used her phone to text her parents and sent them pictures of their grandchildren to keep up the illusion that Jamie was alive. For an entire year, no one suspected a thing. Shelby Neely's descent into darkness didn't happen overnight. His paranoia, growing over months of deception, finally reached a breaking point in December 2018. For nearly a year, he had maintained the lie that Jamie was still alive, using her phone to send texts and photos to her parents. But the weight of this deception, combined with the Ivanic's growing concern, convinced Shelby that the truth would eventually come out. Fearing that Richard and Laura Ivanic would discover Jamie's death and try to take custody of his children, Shelby began to plot the unthinkable, eliminating the Ivanics entirely. He justified this horrific plan as a way to protect his children, though it was clear his actions were as much about self-preservation as anything else. In early December, Shelby packed up his children and drove from Texas to Florida, telling the Ivanics that Jamie couldn't join them due to work commitments. The family welcomed him into their home, completely unaware of the danger they were in. For 2 weeks, Shelby lived with the Ivanics, smiling and sharing meals with the very people he intended to kill. During this time, he studied their routines, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. His calm patience was as chilling as the violence that would soon follow. On December 15, 2018, Shelby put his plan into action. Richard Ivanic was his first victim. As the elderly man sat at the dining table, Shelby struck him with a hammer, delivering 5 to 7 blows to the back of his head. An hour later, Laura came home. Shelby greeted her warmly and lured her toward the kitchen. Before she could see her husband's lifeless body, Shelby attacked her from behind, killing her instantly. He dragged their bodies into a bedroom and cleaned up the blood. Then he waited. Nick Ivanic returned home that evening, completely unaware of the horror that had unfolded. Shelby spent the night with Nick, ordering pizza and smoking marijuana. "I wanted to spend one last night with him," Shelby said. At 4 a.m., while Nick slept on the couch, Shelby struck again. This time, he delivered 8 brutal blows to Nick's head, splattering blood across the living room. With the Ivanic family brutally murdered, Shelby Neely turned his attention to covering up his crimes. This next phase showed just how calculated and methodical he could be. Shelby started by attempting to clean the crime scene. Using mops and chemical cleaners, he wiped away as much blood as possible, but the task was far from thorough. The smell of decomposition, however, was a bigger challenge. To mask it, Shelby used incense, air fresheners, and even scented car fresheners placed around the house. Despite his efforts, the odor began to intensify as days passed. He then began digging a trench in the backyard to bury the bodies. This shallow grave was meant to serve as their final resting place, but moving Richard's body proved too difficult. Richard was a large man, and Shelby, lacking the physical strength to lift him, abandoned the idea of burying any of the victims. To prevent anyone from stumbling upon the scene, Shelby confined the family's dogs in a room with the bodies. Tragically, he later killed the animals, suffocating 2 in garbage bags and striking the 3rd with a hammer. Despite his efforts to cover his tracks, Shelby's careless actions, using the Ivanics' credit cards and driving their car, would lead to his eventual capture. During his interrogation, Shelby confessed to killing not only the Ivanics, but also the family's 3 dogs. One dog, already sick with diabetes, was struck with a hammer to end its suffering. The other 2 were suffocated in garbage bags. Detectives were horrified by Shelby's lack of remorse. "I didn't want to do it," Shelby said, "but I had no choice." The psychological profile of Shelby Neely is as perplexing as it is chilling. Throughout his confession, Shelby displayed an unsettling calmness, recounting the murders with meticulous detail and without a trace of remorse. This lack of empathy and his cold, matter-of-fact tone are hallmarks of psychopathy, a personality disorder characterized by impulsivity, egocentrism, and a complete disregard for the feelings or rights of others. Shelby often portrayed himself as the victim, claiming he was pushed to his breaking point by Jamie's alleged abuse. He described his actions as necessary to protect his children, but his calm demeanor and disturbing rationalizations tell a different story. His ability to kill not just once, but 4 times, including his wife, in-laws, and even the family dogs, suggests a dangerous combination of detachment and calculated cruelty. What's even more unsettling is Shelby's duality. For over a year, he maintained a facade of a caring father while impersonating Jamie to her family. This level of manipulation requires a sharp mind and a deep understanding of how to exploit trust. Ultimately, Shelby's actions reveal a man capable of immense deception, calculated violence, and self-serving justifications, an individual who could destroy his family and still sleep soundly at night. Shelby Neely's chilling confession left little doubt about his guilt, but the wheels of justice moved slowly in his case. After his arrest in January 2019, Shelby was charged with the murders of his wife Jamie and the Ivanic family, Richard, Laura, and Nick. His calm cooperation with investigators played a significant role in the legal proceedings, but it also left many questioning his motives. Was his willingness to confess a sign of remorse or a calculated attempt to avoid harsher consequences? In December 2023, nearly 5 years after his arrest, Shelby pleaded guilty to the murder of Jamie, avoiding the death penalty in exchange for a 30-year prison sentence. During this plea, Shelby assisted investigators by providing details about Jamie's death and the location of her buried body, solidifying the prosecution's case against him. However, Shelby's fate for the murders of the Ivanic family remains uncertain. A penalty phase, scheduled for October 2024, will determine whether he faces life imprisonment without parole or the death penalty for the triple homicide. This next chapter will bring closure to the families affected by Shelby's actions. Yet as the legal system weighs his fate, one thing is clear. Shelby Neely's actions will haunt those involved for years to come. This case is a haunting reminder of how quickly love can turn to violence. Shelby Neely claimed he was protecting his children, but his actions destroyed their family and left them orphans. What do you think? Was Shelby a man pushed to his breaking point, or a cold-blooded killer hiding behind a veil of victimhood? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more deep dives into the world of true crime. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.